Hello, Mish. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. I can hear you. It's fine. Yeah, it's all good. So you're in New Mexico, is that right?
That is correct. Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Cool.
But I hail from New York City.
Cool. And how's the weather over there at the moment?
The weather in Santa Fe is perfect. This is a really great place to live because we have four seasons
Okay.
and all of the seasons are tolerable. So our winters are short and not too bad. We get snow if you love to ski.
Oh, wow.
Our summers are longer, but not terribly hot. We have no humidity and we're 7,000 feet above sea level. So it's just always, even if it's hot during the day, once the sun goes down, there's nothing
Yeah.
to absorb the heat. So it's beautiful sleeping weather at night.
I'm jealous. Yeah, it's not quite the picture in Scotland, as you can imagine, probably. The reputation
Yeah.
does ring true, yeah. Welcome to Free FX, and this is just a short kind of conversation, really. But we'll try and go through the questions I've sent you. But if you want to, go on a tangent, please feel free, and we don't have to go through all the questions. But so the first question I'll open with is the first question, which is that more women in finance in height sort of profile um, um, uh, places such as the former Yellen, former Fed chair, and the new president of the Turkish Central Bank, and other names I've mentioned, Cunningham, former president of the New York Stock Exchange, and Lagarde, of course, ECB and IMF. So with these sort of high profile, do you think that we are seeing a shift so that the idea of leadership, which traditionally has been kind of male in those kind of, well, in lots of sectors, but do you think that's shifting? And are these sort of faces kind of normalizing it? And what do you think about that?
Well, certainly, if you look at today's time versus when I started, which was over 40 years ago, there is a shift in that you saw very, very few women involved in finance and in certainly positions of power, other than prime ministers of different countries that we've had through the years. What's interesting is that all the women that you mentioned were all women of a certain age. And so it really, for me, spells two victories in essence. A, of course, would be just the gender, the fact that women are being recognized as being able to, like in Lagarde's case, be the head of the ECB and in very challenging times right now. But two is from an ageist standpoint that there's a certain amount of respect that is inherent in women at this age because typically women become very invisible, even in careers like film, once they get to be a certain age. So that women are being recognized as having a certain level of experience and wisdom and calm and an intention that would be more for helping people, as seen through these women you just mentioned, then to me, that's just fabulous.
Yeah, and it is the age thing is definitely a positive thing, as you say, because on the kind of male counterpart, well, the American president have been comments about his age and popes, and obviously, it's not been about the Senate, and it tends to be the age seen as a, but so it's good. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also, and I guess it's kind of it seems to be spreading. There's been New Zealand, Australia had Gillard. There's been a few African nations have had heads of state. Latin America, Scandinavia, the UK. There's been Italy now. And, there's been a few. It's almost like a rolling ball that's kind of going through the world, really. So it does, yeah, it kind of spreads hope anyway. It's not.
Absolutely, and certainly, including most of the men that I know, will say that the world will probably be a better place once women are running it. So let's hope that's correct.
Yeah. Well, that was actually the point I had. So this series of interviews, and it kind of the idea that this kind of thread I started on a forum called Baby Pips, and it was, how would the world and finance, but the world look if you had more? And so the thing was the financial kind of booms and busts that you get in financial markets. Is it a microculture that you get once you get 1, 2, 3, 5 men together in a room, and these kind of small behaviors added up create cultures of, I don't know, is that part of the culture that then creates these bubbles in financial markets that kind of, would it be different if you had a more diverse kind of work environments in the sector? That's at certain levels, I that was kind of but there's not a lot of literature, so people said, what are you talking about? It's probably just pie in the sky, but it did make me think, as most kind of conflicts around the world are usually spearheaded by male kind of figureheads, whether there's something about that in markets as well, that we get this sort of insane amount of risk taking, and then inevitably, you can go so far, and then it has to pop at some point, and then you get sort of the bad and the ugly. And so I just wondered whether, and then I started looking into how many women are, and it sort of kind of went from there, looking at lots of research and what's been written about that. Are women better traders? That done research on that. But anyway, it's kind of how it all started, really. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So maybe it will be a better place if we had more. And precisely because the second question was about, there's not been many people making way or in funds, but that's just a UK figure that I mentioned. It's about 10% women heading funds, but maybe that's not so important. But what do you think is the legacy that keeps this kind of glass ceiling, that you have so many women coming up through programs? Deutsche Bank have had programs for women mentoring. I think some of the bigger investment banks have programs for women graduates. The one I have mentioned, Girls Who Invest. There's all these programs, but you get to a point where there's a sort of, there's a lot of them, and then they sort of get dispersed. They don't seem to go above a certain level. So, and it's not a matter of being capable. So what do you think what happens to those women? Then, the men go on up, and what happens? What do you think about that?
Oh, we could write an entire book on this topic of conversation, because it's so complicated. You have to look at the basic DNA and the beginnings of the roles of men and women, going way back to Neanderthal and post-Neanderthal, men having been always physically stronger, were obviously taking the role of provider, where women would stay within the clan to raise the children, to procreate, to feed and cook, gather. So the whole gatherer thing is really where we came from. And, of course, that begs the question of how much have we evolved to this point? And the good news is, on many levels, we have, but basic human nature is very difficult. And so there are certain instincts that both genders have that I believe will probably remain the case, just part of the human nature in general, gender just being one of the definitions of what makes us human beings. So I always kind of look at that as sort of the backdrop, but I can tell you my own personal experience, because when I started down on the New York commodities, well, actually I started out as a special education teacher. So let's even go back to gender definition. My parents were not college educated. My dad worked for the government as a postal worker. He delivered the mail, essentially. And even though we were very low middle class, it's not like my mother was going to go out and work, right? Her job was to be home in time for the kids once we went to school, and provide for my dad and look pretty. I mean, very 1950s housewife, where she had a certain expectation of how she was supposed to look when my father came home, right? You know, lipstick on, hair done, cute little dress, dinner ready, you know, the whole 1950s scene, right? So her generation, when I went to college, was already starting to question those roles and those stereotypes. Because when I went to college, I took a course, feminism was just starting to come. So my childhood idols like Betty Friedan and Bella Abzug, these were all women in New York. The ERA was starting to come in vogue. That was really my mother's generation, but my mother wasn't a part of all of that. So naturally, even though there was that side of me that was very attracted to branching out and breaking the glass ceiling, I listened to my parents, which was, you're good in school, you're good in math, you're good in science, you can talk well, you love people, you should become a teacher. So that was kind of my mom's generation. Then my generation, when we raised our daughters, of course, we were like, okay, we kind of broke the mold, we burned the bra, we got some level of ERA, there's consciousness about wages being still much less, and positions typically run by men being very, very much underrepresented by women. Go out there. And so it's been really fun to see, and I'll get back to the floor because I kind of took a left turn, but it's been very gratifying for me to see, as I watch the generations of women, and now with Gen Z women, that they don't necessarily have the same prejudices against their own gender the way we do. And of course, now gender even in and of itself is being questioned, right? In terms of why are we being defined by being a male or a female? So, you know, it's just so interesting. But again, it always going to get back to women have the kids. Men don't get pregnant, women get pregnant. And that's always going to mean that there's a certain level of limitation, at least in the beginning. And I know that even that's changing, but I don't know if we can always fight our DNA to nest and be home with our children. And even though laws have changed more for fathers being able to stay home, it's slow. So that's to me is the whole anthropological backdrop. And when I got started, I learned about the commodities exchange through actually a female, not a male, a friend of mine who was living in Manhattan in the same building that I was. And she was working for Merrill Lynch as a clerk. And even from the clerk side, there weren't that many women down there. And she brought me down, and I went nuts. But I had certain characteristics that made it good for me to want to be attracted to that kind of field. I was an athlete, so I wasn't worried about standing on my feet all day in a physical location where you were bumping up against people. 2 is my father was a sports fanatic, and since he didn't have sons, I was always being taken to football games, American football games, baseball games, basketball games, and my father was a karate martial artist. And so I was even being taken to expeditions and karate fights. So I kind of had like a jockey background, I guess you could say. But if you didn't have, if you weren't physically fit, and especially as a woman, and you didn't have a knowledge of how it was to be in a male-dominated situation, it was hard. So for me, I was kind of like the perfect girl to go down there, because I was physical. I was used to being in a man's world with my dad and sports. My mom was very much that kind of docile housewife, so she was never really my role model. He was. And then, of course, I was good in math and science and all the things that my parents told me I was good at. So, yeah, boom, I went down. But I watched a lot of women not able to make it.
Okay.
And I can tell you why, and it's not necessarily the fault always of men and sexism, as one would like to think, but that's really not necessarily true.
And I guess as sort of as a segue, the paid trading sort of went into screens, and one of the questions was, you still have to work with somebody at some point, with a company, with its, I suppose very few people can just trade for themselves, have the capital, have everything, without having had any exposure to. There are some, no, absolutely, but so I mean, so the idea that being behind the screen is neutral, but eventually it's like any occupation. At some point you have to meet people. At some point you have to network. At some point you have to, if you want to, I don't know, expand. If you want to involve other people, and so you're back to the idea that you have to be exposed to, maybe a work culture, maybe other ways of doing work that are not so neutral, maybe more kind of stereotypically, financial, or stereotypically male, female, stereotypically middle class, or I don't know, whatever. So I'm just saying, do you think that when the pit trading kind of ceased to be almost entirely, and kind of you were in the oil, right, trading?
I was in a lot of different places, but yeah, NYMEX was where I spent most of my time in oil. Yeah. Well,
then,
that's a very good question. And it's one that I've thought about before today, even because in down on the floor, and I spent 14 years there, I felt absolutely almost no limitations of what I could do, because it was the pure bastion of capitalism, right? If you could stand in the pit or stand outside of the pit, and you could figure out how to make money, and you would participate and add liquidity to the overall market, and you showed up every day, and you took your knocks and like everybody else, and you took your victories, like everybody else. The opportunities didn't matter whether you were a man, woman, or I like to say you could have been a Martian. It doesn't matter. And so I thought a lot about that. The only time that sexism ever really came up on the floor was more, I mean, you've always had your occasional idiot guy who might have had a bad day or a fight with his wife or what have you, would say something off color to me in terms of my being a woman. But for the most part, it was my own, I had to just overcome certain things that the men didn't have to deal with. I used to laugh actually every month when I would menstruate, and I would say, this is no menstruating woman, because, you did have to go through a certain level of hormonal changes every month. But then I learned men do that too. It's just a little different. I got to know these men very, very well. Since we have been off the floor, off the pit, as you ask, where the proving ground is not, I'm there with these guys every day and I see what they're doing, they see what I'm doing. When you've had a good day, they know when you've had a good day. When you've had a bad day, they know when you've had a bad day. And there's a camaraderie constant. When you're removed from all of that and you're trying to make your way into a community through social media and through FinTwit, I have found that to be more difficult as a woman than I did being on the floor. And that is interesting to me, because now I'm not really sure why. I think partly is because there's a zero barrier to entry, so that anybody could get on FinTwit and say they made this money and they know what to do and follow me and I've got a service and blah, 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 blah. And so I think in the financial community, the prejudice is that men know more about it than women. And since there are so few women, it's been harder, even for the ones that are very well known, to compete with the numbers of social media followers, let's say, as an example. I also think it's because there's a presupposition that women don't make as much money as men. And part of it is because women aren't the type of people who are going to go on and say, I'm a millionaire and I know what to do. But you'll see men do that. all the time. So because we don't necessarily lead with our egos in the same way, I think that that's been more of a hindrance than a positive. So I have really tried to walk a dance between proving that I know what I'm doing and that I'm extremely successful without sounding like I'm trying to compete with the male ego, or in the case of a woman, be considered to be a bitch. And that's the other thing, is men will label women a bitch like that, and other women will label other women a bitch like that. I didn't have to deal with that on the floor, not at all. There was nothing like that. So it's all been this in this the last 20 years of real social media and office trading. And it's only now, kind of like what we started out, as I've gotten older and more, I'm there all the time and I'm consistent, and people can see that I'm successful just by whatever it is I decide to share, that I feel like now I'm getting a new status as a woman, but it's not the way I thought it was going to be. It's more oracle-ish, kind of like the Matrix, right? So who was the savior of everything? Was a woman, an older woman. So I used to think, oh God, that leaves me ripe for ageism. But actually, I'm sort of embracing now that if there's a sage feeling that can happen as a woman that has been around, obviously has been successful, then go for it. But yeah, that's kind of, I hope that's a good answer.
I could listen to you talking for a long time, so I don't even want to stop. I'll just let you roll on. I'll be quiet. Thank you so much, Mish. And I was thinking of just a slightly off script, because obviously with Market Gauge you get, so it's there's a kind of education side to the platform. There are different packages and different sort of content that people can day trading or swing trading, or I've done a bit of research, but qualified person. But do you see? I mean, maybe you personally don't sit there with the stats of all the clients coming through the doors, virtual or otherwise, but do you see? Because there's a lot of interest that women have individually in trading and wealth management and managing their finances, and but so do you see? But in terms of trading, do you see something that that women are doing differently now? I mean, have you seen a
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I first started all right, so MarketGauge is our publishing company. We also have an asset management company called MGAM LLC. And they're connected in that, I mean, one thing that came from the floor is I met my husband. He was off the floor by the time we started dating, and that was important to me. I did not want to be associated with a girl looking for a husband on the floor. I mean, that I did not want to go there. And of course, that's a whole other, that's another thing that really hasn't left in terms of myth of women, right? That women are all looking for a man with money and they just really use their sexuality or whatever. I mean, let's put that on the shelf for a second. But getting back to MarketGauge, so Keith, my husband, who was a floor trader, he and I started MarketGauge, and it was meant for education, although he started out in the institutional space, and I came on in 2009 after the financial crisis to teach. So to teach about our products, to increase our products, and to help the retail space. And it was basically male dominated at that point. There was always a few women, but I really saw the switch. A lot of women joined my service. A lot of women have bought our products, and a lot of women have opened up accounts to give us for assets under management for our RIA. And so I think it's been incredible how many more women are interested and involved with trading now than what used to be. Yeah. And I think COVID really gave that another good push because women were home. And now they were able to start trading and realizing they had some level of skill and they could network with other women, which is, you mentioned Kim before. I met her because of Women of Wall Street Twitter Spaces, which I don't know why it went defunct, but it did go defunct. But nonetheless, in that very short period of time, it was great to meet all these young women who are sort of picking up the ball without all of the headwinds that I had to go through. So yeah, market gauge, women will still tell me, but not as much as they used to, I don't know anything about finance, or, I leave that to my financial planner, or my husband has took care of that. You don't hear that so much anymore. It's really been more women getting confidence that they're probably not only capable of it, but maybe in some ways better than their male counterparts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is also not a judgment. But again, let's talk about the budgeting of the family's money.
Yeah.
Regardless of who brings it in, it's generally the woman who figures out how much she needs to spend on food and school for the kids and a date with her husband. And, I mean, all these different things come into play that the women just naturally do. They naturally budget the family money. They naturally budget the time that the family spends, how much time the kids spend doing homework or going after school activities or socializing. So I think we're just natural budgeters, and we're natural. We put things into components very readily because we have to. And that's how our DNA. So yeah, now they're figuring out I could take all of that and I could become a trader too. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. That interview that I did with Jane Newton, and she's a financial advisor, and I did ask about how has the landscape shifted with women looking to secure their own finances for retirement and stuff, because that's kind of been shifting, as you say, from being, and also with the fact that people do not ideally do not depend on somebody for income, but they make their own income, or combine their income, but they're still capable of standing on their own 2 feet, which means that they can decide how that money is allocated. So that's brilliant.
And Francesca, you mentioned in the very beginning about the culture, right?
Yeah.
And have men created these bubbles? Well, one of the things that has evolved from the 50s and the 60s, when we had this huge growth of the middle class, of course, is just a level of corruption and the disparity of the wealth between the top 1% and everybody else has created a dwindling middle class and more of a need for a double income type of family situation. So naturally, just out of that, women are going to try to figure out not only how to make money, but how to not necessarily even expose themselves to the workplace and do it more independently because nobody's telling them what to do.
Yeah. And I was thinking as well about personal space that you mentioned before, in terms of the trading floor, etc. And in some countries, it's okay when you greet people to be close to them. So, like, in Italy, you would kiss on both cheeks, men and women, the same. If you don't really know them, maybe there's a bit of distance, but
Right.
generally with friends, there's not a differentiation. Where in some countries, for example, in Scotland or UK, generally speaking, unless people are heavily intoxicated,
That
no
never
hugging.
happens in Scotland.
No. It's all a myth. So the hugging only happens. The men hug women when they greet, and that's okay. But not between men. This is kind of like guarded space. It's a handshake. So, and I find that really awkward because I'm a hugger. Give me hugs,
I am a
please.
hugger too.
So, and then So why? So that kind of almost legitimates the fact that we enter a personal space with women, but not with other men. Which means that it makes it kind of, if you extend that, I mean, it's a leap of faith. I'd just go with it if you can, but you kind of legitimate kind of approaching women or entering their personal space in lots of situations. I mean, that might also lead to situations that are quite unpleasant, but I mean, just generally, or talk over them, or I just wonder if there's something in that why we think it's okay to do that, but not with other men. What's so difficult about being kind of relax around other men, or we have this vibe that we send off of having a almost like a sort of stay off my space kind of thing. And
Not
that's
on
kind
the
of
floor, not on the floor
no, all
at
right,
all.
interesting. How
In
comes?
fact, that was really the thing that I found to be most amusing and comforting in essence, was to see how men greet each other when they see each other all the time and it's an intense environment. Men were so physical with each other down there that I would be in awe of the fact of how much they hugged each other, how much they backslapped each other, rear butt slapped each other, talked about each other's body parts, you know, grabbed each other constantly, you know, like puppies. And so once I saw that, anytime anybody approached me more physically than what would be normal if you were just meeting somebody in a restaurant or outside at a party, I realized that I was actually being treated like one of the guys. You know, if somebody came from behind me, which happened a lot, and grabbed on my shoulders, or gave me a quick massage, or, you know, smacked me on the back, or, you know, that's about as far as it went. Nobody would go any further than that. But if they looked at me up and down and said, "Oh, Mish, you know, looking good today," or whatever, instead of taking that in the wrong way, I'd say, this is how they act with each other. So I guess, why should I be offended, unless you go past a certain point, of course. But just it was all like kind of in good fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost like
So
a sports kind of environment.
right. And I've noticed now men hug way more,
Oh
at
yeah,
least
yeah,
in the States.
it's changing.
Yeah, that has changed a lot. And I've also discovered a new hug from younger men that, see, older men, when I've hugged older men, they usually come in. They come in, you know, like a regular hug. So their bodies are against your bodies. Men 40 and under don't do that. And I guess I didn't even know about this because I had a daughter, not a son, but they come in from the side.
Mhm.
There's a side hug that happens now.
Yeah.
And I always, and now I'm used to it. But when it first happened, I thought, oh, okay, that's weird. I almost like shifted my body to get more in front of them.
Yeah.
And then I realized what they were
So true, yeah.
doing. So now
Yeah.
I do the side hug with men. I mean, women still very much embrace each other, but
So
yeah,
true, yeah.
yeah. So now
Yeah.
I see men do that with each other, is more the side hug, and they hug women like that. So it's just funny. It's funny to me.
Lots of thoughts about that. Yeah, that's really true. So yeah, I mean, I just I mean, I don't think we've probably got time for all the questions, but is there anything that you think about when yeah, so we talk about, you know, people
Well, you
sort of,
mentioned something about financial literacy, and I thought that
yeah,
would
yeah,
be,
the STEM and subjects and people
yeah,
in
and I thought that would be interesting to talk about, because
yes, please.
I've sort of come full circle, right? So in my life, I've been a special education teacher because I really wanted to work with kids that were sort of the forgotten kids. And I always say that really the civil rights movement that has never really happened has been for people with disabilities. They are still very segregated in society. They don't have friends. And so I became, they only associate with either their families or paid professionals. And so in the circle of friends that any typical person has, you know, those circles go far out. And in a child or even a young adult with a disability, the circles are very small. So I wanted to change that. And the way to change that was to modify curriculum so that there would be an accessibility for these kids in a general ed class, which in turn would expose them to typical kids, would expose typical kids to kids with disabilities. And I felt like that was one small way to heal the planet, because if typical kids realize that there is ability even in disability, then there would be an acceptance and a tolerance that might go further. So that's my first love. My second love is, of course, has always been trading and finance and being able to be autonomous. I've never had a boss except when I was teaching. And for the very short time when I first started out in trading, I worked for commodities, but I never worked for any other company. I always worked for myself. And then my third love has always been performing, right? I've done stage, I've done teeny weeny little indie films, but I've been in front of a camera a lot or on stage a lot. And I'm a natural. I love it. Doesn't bother me at all. So what's happened is over the last several years, I developed a program for financial literacy called the Economic Modern Family, which is a combination of inclusion and accessibility, finance, and performance, because they're characters. And I developed the characters really to explain to myself how the whole economy worked. Well, why is everybody always focused on NASDAQ 100 when it's really 2,000 companies in the Russells that dictate the US economy? And gee, there's grandma retail because let's face it, without the consumer, there is no economy, blah, blah, blah. And so these characters were born, and there are 7 of them now. So my legacy really, and I'm actually actively looking now to begin in a real way creating curriculum, starting with maybe grade school kids going to middle school, high school, college, and then any age really, to create these characters and turn them into teaching tools, whether all you can get is Grandpa Russell 2000, make stuff, and Granny Retail buys stuff, and that's all you can get from it, to looking at them through charts, through being able to make trading decisions and understanding the macro, and on and on and on. So when you mentioned financial literacy, I got really excited because that is my full circle, and that is really what I want to have available to people by the time I'm ready to travel more and enjoy my life more, and not necessarily always be dedicated to what I'm doing right now, which is trading and teaching and presenting and talking to you.
That's incredible. Can I just pause? We've got like 2 minutes something on this meeting. Do you want to come back in?
No, we can wrap it up. This was a good, I mean, there's a lot of information here. So if you want to wrap it up, and I'm always happy to come back and talk more about different topics, however, whatever you want, that's fine.
That's a good length. I think we've covered quite a few things as well. And thanks very much for so if people want to find you, obviously, let's kind of maybe just go through. So MarketGauge.
My Twitter handle is @MarketMinute. Obviously MarketGauge, if you want to see my media clips. I also write a daily where I list the media clips, but I also give daily information. It's pretty easy to find me. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm everywhere. So, but just to kind of wrap up our conversation today, I think I love to explore the whole idea of anthropology and how things evolve, and gender being one. But the real story is this, is that no matter who you are, getting some level of education and learning how to do this is truly the best way, at least to increase your own stature in life economically. Mm-hmm. And it's still a free market in essence that anyone can participate in. I think that's really the overriding message. We talked about the woman thing today, but I would say the same thing to whomever.
Yeah, that is a good message to finish on. It's been incredible to share this. So thank you very much. And I hope that people find this interesting, as I'm sure they will. So thanks very much for your time, Mish, today, and have a great day.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thanks. Take care.
You too.